you so much, Mustafa. Thank you for coming this evening. Won't have escaped your notice, I'm sure, that the title of this book is shared with George Gershwin's Depression-era lyric. And when I chose it, the title over a year ago, I had no idea that it would be so timely, the title itself, and the link with the Depression-era desperation would be so relevant for us today. Hardly an hour goes by without someone making an analogy with the New Deal era. And so really that year has made a considerable difference in our lives. And for people who are newly unemployed, and we're talking at this point about maybe 700,000 people every month losing their jobs. Many of them probably feel that the reason for the loss of their livelihoods has a very recent origin, the Wall Street financial crisis. A meteor in the form of the Wall Street financial crisis has fallen to earth and rendered job security almost as extinct as the dinosaurs. And as attractive as that theory is for many people, I don't think it really helps us to explain how and why the employment base is crumbling so rapidly right now. We really have to look beyond the Wall Street debacle to understand in the last 2 decades how our livelihoods have become so precarious. And basically that's what my book does. It shows how 2 decades of deregulation have reshaped the livelihoods of almost everyone in the industrialized world, and also a large slice of the population in developing countries. As a result, no one, not even in the traditional professions, can any longer expect a fixed pattern of employment in the course of their lifetime. The temp has increasingly become a preferred form of employment in all forms, in all of the growth sectors of the economy. And what economists call non-standard work has been on a forced march from the low-wage sectors into the high-wage sectors of the economy. So it's no surprise then to hear a lot of laments for the bygone era of standard employment as we used to know it. And certainly for youth who are entering the labor market today, stories about those decades of stable employment are tall tales indulged by the elderly, not unlike the lore of Great Depression hardship which baby boomers had to endure from their parents. In retrospect, that Keynesian era of state-backed securities was a brief interregnum. It was or more likely, an armed truce. Indeed, this golden era for some of social welfare systems and stable union contracts and long-term tenure with a single employer is a marked deviation from the historical norm. If you look at world history, it's a rare exception to the more general and enduring experience of self-employment, intermittent work, and isolation from any form of social insurance. In the last 2 decades, what have we seen? We've seen economic liberalization also push hundreds of millions of uprooted people into the migration streams that now crisscross the world, and they share their precarious position in the low-income workforce with native-born casualties of what is often called flexible casualization in the unskilled and also semi-skilled service sectors. The fact is that employers have taken advantage of this flexploitation in low-skilled sectors, and they've come to expect the same from the same kind of profitable returns from pushing contingent employment in higher-skilled sectors of the economy. During the dot-com years, for example, we heard a lot about the self-employed virtues of being a free agent. Everyone was encouraged to become a free agent, to liberate themselves from the tedium of a stable slot in a large hierarchical organization, typical of corporate America. And in the last several years or so, we've heard a similar promotional pitch being made for the so-called creative class. Artists, designers, wordsmiths of all stripes who seem to possess an almost alchemical ability to add value to almost anything. cities that are looking for a turnaround strategy were encouraged to court this largely self-employed talent pool rather than spend billions of dollars in public subsidies for sports stadia or tax breaks for fly-by-night corporations. City managers were persuaded that gentrifying creatives, members of the creative class, are much cheaper to cater to. A few bike trails, they love to bike. A few coffee shops, they love coffee. Some downtown lofts, they love unorthodox ex-industrial building stock. And also the semblance of an art scene for the much sought after gays, because we know that all gay people are born with a creative gene. Young, childless, and given to gourmet consumption, members of the creative class were guaranteed to boost property value wherever they lived. And over time, as in the last several years or so, these largely independent contractors have come to be seen as the new model workers for the knowledge economy. They're self-disciplined, they're self-directed, they're primed to win recognition through their enterprising pluck. They're very much accustomed to the intermittent cycle of feast and famine, and they're willing to put in very long hours in pursuit of aesthetically pleasing product. The creative economy itself was promoted as a sweepstakes with lavish returns in the form of blockbuster hits and returns on intellectual property. And certainly, once you're in the game, some of these players do indeed hit the jackpot. You know, shades of Slumdog Millionaire or Susan Boyle. Don't get me started on Susan Boyle. But most of them subsist neither as employers or traditional employees in a kind of limbo of uncertainty, juggling their options, massaging their contacts, managing their overcommitted time, and developing coping strategies for handling the uncertainty of never knowing where the next project or their next source of income is coming from. In other words, the working life of the vast majority of creatives is as precarious as the temps and the migrants at the bottom of the wage economy. Indeed, when the recession began to hit, those segments of the workforce were the first to fall into a deep hole. Before this year is out, the fear of falling into that hole will have touched almost everyone in this economy. And canny employers, exploiting the threat of unemployment or the fear of unemployment, will have seized the opportunity to extract concessions from even the most secure in the workforce. Some employers will lose their shirts, but many will end up rejoicing at having a workforce on their own terms, desperate for a lifetime, even desperate for a lifeline, rather, even if it comes in the form of intermittent employment with no benefits and no guarantee of a stable income. So the net result is that the financial meltdown may well deliver on a plate the easy-to-exploit working conditions that employers have pushed long and hard for. While speculators are spinning the crisis for short-term gain, the rest of us will need to rebuild the economy with the long-term health of the planet in mind. Green-collar jobs are really the only way to go. We're talking about sustainable employment for goals that are equally durable or sustainable. Ultimately, we shouldn't have to make a distinction between mere job creation and the making of livelihoods, what I would call the making of livelihoods in the broader sense of sustaining economic and planetary life. Labor advocates, I think, should pursue and protect jobs with an environmental audit in mind or in their hands. And I think it's fair to say that some unions have been at the forefront of efforts to jumpstart green-collar job creation, whether that's in renewable energy development or appropriate technologies or other forms of carbon-free employment. The Blue-Green Alliance and the Apollo Alliance, for example, includes the United Steelworkers, the SEIU, and CWA. Others, however, have lobbied to retain jobs in wasteful, hazardous, or worthless forms of production that, quite frankly, make our growth-driven consumer societies so destructive to land and life.